Well, good evening. Hello. My name's Julie McCrossin, and it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you to the Wolper Wellbeing Forum, the first for 2026, hosted by Wolper Jewish Hospital and Friends of Wolper. And our topic tonight is weight management. We're going to discuss GLP-1 medications and care and a whole range of evidence-based strategies, including intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, but a range of strategies. And as I said, my name is Julie McCrossin. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're broadcasting to you from the land of the Gadigal people in Sydney, and to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And a special welcome to you if this is your first time at a Wolper Jewish Hospital webinar. Wolper Jewish Hospital is a specialist medical rehabilitation and palliative care hospital in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and Wolper welcomes patients from all cultural and religious backgrounds while offering care within a framework of Jewish cultural and religious values and dietary requirements. And indeed, the majority of patients at Wolper Jewish Hospital are not, in fact, Jewish. We'd like to acknowledge tonight the generous donation from the Shell family in memory of their husband and father, Dr. Alan Shell, OAM. Alan was a long-time supporter of Wolper Jewish Hospital, a passionate advocate for health education, very active on these webinars. And in keeping with his vision, Wolper will dedicate the donation to ongoing health education initiatives, including this wellbeing program. Well, let's begin. Our community partner for this our community partner for this weight management webinar is the Weight Issues Network, and it's my great pleasure to welcome to the screen the operations lead of the Weight Issues Network, Teresa Thompson. Welcome, Teresa.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you for having me. I'd like to thank the Wolper Jewish Hospital for inviting the Weight Issues Network, also known as WIN, to be a part of this incredibly important conversation. I'm here representing WIN, Australia's national peak body for people with lived experience of overweight and obesity. And I'm here to just briefly to give you a bit of an idea of what it is that we do. So at WIN, our mission is simple but powerful. To work towards all people in Australia who are living in a larger body to have safe and affordable access to accurate information, medical services, psychological and peer support and advocacy. So for our lived experience members, those who have experience living with overweight or obesity, WIN provides a safe, stigma-free community where people can connect with others who understand the complexity of living with weight issues. We offer access to trustworthy, evidence-based information, including resources on treatment options, navigating healthcare and understanding emerging approaches such as medications, digital tools, and lifestyle strategies. We offer opportunities to shape policy and research so that people living with weight issues are not just subjects of discussion, but active contributors to the solutions. We also offer training and leadership development, helping our lived experience advocates build confidence and skills to share their stories safely and effectively. It's important to note that our goal is to empower people, not to tell anybody what they should do. We want to ensure that they have the support, dignity, and information that they need to make the decisions that are right for them. WIN also works closely with clinicians, researchers, and organisations across Australia. We help the sector with embedding lived experience in program design, research, and service delivery, ensuring interventions are relevant, respectful, and grounded in real-world experience. We improve communication and reduce weight stigma through training, co-design workshops, and lived experience advisory groups. We access consumer insights that help shape more effective person-centred care, and we build partnerships that bring together scientific expertise and lived experience to improve outcomes for everybody. We know that the best health systems are built when clinicians, researchers, and consumers all work together, and WIN is proud to be a bridge between these groups. Ultimately, WIN is working towards a future where people living with weight issues receive compassionate, evidence-based care. Weight stigma is recognised as a serious barrier to health. Lived experience is valued as essential expertise. and every Australian has access to the support that they need to thrive, whatever their weight, health journey, or background. We encourage anyone here tonight who has had lived experience of overweight or obesity, or an interest in the treatment or sciences in this field, to join us for free by simply registering through our website at weightissuesnetwork.org. Thank you again for having us here tonight. We are honoured to partner with Wolper Jewish Hospital. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Teresa.
Yes.
So let me now welcome our two specialist weight management experts for this evening. It's welcome to Professor Katherine Samaras, a consultant endocrinologist and senior staff specialist at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney, and a senior researcher at the Garvan Institute of Medical Research. Thank you and welcome back, Katherine, to a Wolper webinar. And also welcome to Professor Garron Dodd, a neuroscientist and researcher at the University of Melbourne. So very much the scientist, I think, Garron, is your key message. You're a metabolic neuroscience researcher and the head of the Metabolic Neuroscience Laboratory, and also teaching a range of students at the University of Melbourne. And this is deaf sign clapping, and so I welcome you with that. I wonder, and a reminder to everyone who's joined us, you can put questions all the way through under the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we've also enacted the reaction button. So if you want to react with hearts or thumbs up at any point, please feel free to give us an enthusiastic reaction. Katherine Samaras, consultant endocrinologist from St Vincent's, let me come to you. Just some quick definitions for people, because overweight and obese, just what do those terms mean? How do you describe to patients how do you know whether you're overweight or obese?
So we use the simple measure, when we commonly use that term, we use the simple measure of body mass index. It's a really crude measure, and I'll allude to a little bit why. It's basically your weight divided by your height, divided by your height again. So if you do it that way, you can do it on your telephone calculator. It's very simple. So it's essentially weight divided by height squared. The problem with it is it's just a mass measure, and it doesn't give us any idea about where we carry the fat, which actually is, when you're looking at and assessing somebody for their health risks, it doesn't sort of capture where your waist is. So if we look at the BMI, the cutoff for healthy weight is under 25. If you're under 18, you're underweight or very underweight. But in that 18 to 25, you're healthy weight, according to just body mass index. Overweight is 25 to 30, and then obese is anything over 35. The problem is it doesn't assess where you carry your weight. And we know that visceral adiposity, it's also called central obesity, it's also called the apple shape, that determines the cardiovascular, diabetes, cancer risk. So if we're looking at waist for women, it should be under 80 centimeters. And for men, it should be, a healthy waist is under 100 centimeters. So if we want two very simple measures, we can use those. And when I'm assessing a patient, I will look much more at their central adiposity, because that is where the health risk actually lies. There is another scale called the Edmonton Obesity Scale, and that actually factors in comorbidities. So it has a ranking of 5. And so you can actually be overweight, in that overweight BMI range, and actually have no health risks and be what's considered metabolically healthy. And so that's where it's usually women, and they're carrying their fat around their what's called the gluteofemoral region, so it's bottom and thighs. And that's actually a very safe type of fat, and it doesn't carry that health risk. And so I want people to understand we have that simplistic BMI. If that's all that's being applied to you, then that's not enough. A waist is a great measure. And then if you've got somebody that's really thinking about you, they're wanting to know about your cholesterol, your blood pressure, what your glucose level is, family factors like cancer risk. And they're really important in individualizing where you think you need to be placing that person on their health risks, rather than just looking at their body mass.
Because one of your key messages, isn't it, when you're dealing with individual patients, for example, is that you do a very comprehensive assessment that involves a lot about family history and many aspects of lifestyle. Can you just give us a sense of the sorts of issues you'd be going into with an individual, so that the BMI might be a gross measure, but the sort of additional work you do to try and work out what's the best weight management project for an individual patient?
Thank you, Julie. This is so important when we come to talking about some of the things that are coming up. So a good clinician who is looking at the whole individual wants to know when the weight gain started to happen. Is this something that started off in childhood? Is it, after a fractured ankle at 35? Is it stopping sport after university or high school? One wants to understand the social aspects of where low-hanging fruit might be. Is it that one might be drinking too much alcohol? Is it that one has food cravings? When do they occur? What are the triggers? One wants to understand, and this is really important, the reasons why people eat. I think it's naive to think we just eat because it's mealtime. Yeah, we do. But some people, their excess energy intake comes when perhaps they might be triggered by anxiety or stress, or by sadness, or seeking comfort. A lot of people will use food to soothe themselves when they're feeling stress, or there's something nasty going on in their life, or they can't get to sleep at night. What's really going on? So one has to assess food patterns, what the patterns of intake are, and try and understand the triggers. What's really important, to not waste people's time, is what have they tried before that didn't work? Because there's no point going back. People have often tried many different things. One wants to know what was helpful. And then if it got derailed, what was the factor that derailed? Sometimes it's a physical injury. Sometimes it's stress, marriage, children, things going on in their lives, and they weren't able to put time into themselves anymore. We have to acknowledge, and given the population that we're looking at, there are lots of people, our audience, in their 60s, and they're sandwiched. They've got children, perhaps even grandchildren, and often parents who have high needs, and delivering to all those people. One wants to know what kinds of food people like. There's no point giving people dietary advice for food that they don't like. Being aware of the cultural aspects of food intake. Are people observing Friday night about the factors around that? Is it that we're feasting all the time? Is it our social network and going out for dinners that end up being 3 courses and boozy? Is that what's derailing things? So the patterns of food intake, the preferences, the cultural aspects of food. What kind of things do people like doing? What's their physical activity? There's no point telling people you need to walk for an hour a day when they're running from 6:30 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night and they don't have time for themselves. What sort of exercise has been beneficial in the past? But most importantly, what do they love doing?
You said to me when we had a prior discussion that everyone has a different pathway to excessive eating and overweight, and there are as many pathways to changing those patterns if you're going to reduce it, but that you believe people need to find a clinician experienced in managing weight who has a holistic approach. And I guess we have a sense of that from the broad range of questions that you're giving in the assessment, and that people have to have a long-term relationship with someone that they trust. So you're really sending a message there that it is a lifelong activity to manage weight?
So I say to people when I meet them, look, we're going to work on weight reduction, and the aim is to achieve a weight that you can then maintain for life. but expect that the work involved in getting that weight off will be very similar to the work that's involved in keeping it off for life. Because once you've gained weight, physiologically, your fat cells want to get back to that weight. And so fighting, resisting that re-equilibration where one just goes back up, that's really hard work. And a lot of that is psychological and requiring people to be supported and feel that if there's a little bit of a slip, they can go back to their clinician and say, I'm having a bit of trouble. Can we rejig what I'm doing so that I can get back on track again? And a lot of it is new normal habit development. And that takes time. The neuroscience, and perhaps Garron might talk about this, the neuroscience shows us that it takes 3 years of repeat. It's terribly boring. Repeat, to actually rejig those new pathways, those brain pathways that makes a new habit, a new healthier habit to help maintain that weight.
And I will come to Professor Garron now. And just a reminder, if you've just joined us, Professor Garron is a neuroscientist and researcher at the University of Melbourne and head of Metabolic Neuroscience Laboratory there, so involved in a lot of research. Welcome to and welcome to that beautiful University of Melbourne garden that we can see in the background.
Thank you very much, Julie.
I won't take the time to send up a heart. I'll ask somebody else to do that. We saw there, I think it was about 44% of people who've tried a medication, and I'm sure there are a number of people who've joined us tonight very interested to hear about the GLP-1 medications. Could you just explain, Garron, what does that mean, GLP-1 medications?
Of course, Julie. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present today and talk about what I believe to be probably one of the most fascinating areas of science and medicine right now. So GLP-1 is a receptor in your body. And what drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro do is they mimic the hormone GLP-1, like I say, which is naturally in your body, and they mimic its action at the GLP-1 receptor.
And is that receptor in your brain?
So that receptor is in many areas of the body and brain, but predominantly it works through receptors on your pancreas and promotes the secretion of insulin. And that's why it's really important and beneficial in the lowering of blood sugar. But importantly, what it does is it enters into the brain and targets neurons in the hypothalamus of the brain, a key region that's so important to the feelings of appetite, hunger, and the area of the brain also regulates blood sugar. So that's really the area of the brain that regulates this phenomena that we've known in science for a very long time, which is often referred to as food noise. And what happens is drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro mimic this natural hormone in the body and makes you feel full and suppresses your appetite. Now, it also does one other thing as well, and it targets receptors in neurons, which are brain cells, in another part of the brain, at the very base of the brain at the back, called the brainstem. And this is the area of the brain that makes you feel nauseous and also regulates the motility, the movement of your GI tract. And this is where a lot of the side effects...
That's a gastrointestinal tract, your gut.
Exactly. So this is where a lot of the notable side effects of incretin-based, GLP-1-based drugs target. So fundamentally, that's how they work. And they work through their actions on the GLP-1 receptor within the brain.
Now, I should say to people that you think the role of the brain in appetite control has been your life work to some degree, and that while these new medications are not a silver bullet and they don't work for everyone, they are an indication that we've been looking at obesity the wrong way, that it's not about willpower. And the new medications have opened the door to treat what has been at times considered for some untreatable obesity. And obviously I'll come back to Katherine for a comment on this, but just how significant are the emergence of these medications? And for people some people may have tuned into this thinking, is these something I should talk to my GP about? But what's your basic thoughts at this stage?
So I think there's a lot to say on it, Julia, and I don't want to overstate things, but one thing I just want to make very clear is that I would argue that this is a glorious new dawn in medicine and particularly in science around the treatment of obesity. Never before has there been a pharmacotherapy as effective as incretin-based therapies. They are not perfect, and I'll speak to that. But irrespective, this has carved out the biggest class of drugs that's ever existed. The market for obesity therapies are huge because the incidence is so important. Not only that, but obesity is a leading risk factor of cancer, of hypertension, of stroke, of dementias. And what's clear now is that by resolving elements of obesity through reductions, meaningful reductions in weight loss, we are seeing reduced risk of these key things, of the incidence of cancers, of the reduced risk of the incidence of dementias. So it's having a major effect. Now, previous to this, the current standard of care was diet and exercise. And what was really nice and really clear from the introductory poll was that most people are not confused about what to do. Most people have tried these things, and as Katherine beautifully alluded to, you cannot trick the body for too long. What happens is there are major pathophysiological reasons. So there's a reason why someone becomes obese. There are mechanisms in the body that break down over time. And when that happens, it's very hard to trick the body and particularly the brain and to lose weight simply by reductions in food intake and exercising more. Because as soon as you lose some weight, the body has strong mechanisms to make you feel very hungry, to change your behavior, and regain the weight.
So that idea that there's somehow a set weight, you hear people say, that individuals have, and the body will strive to go back to that's a scientific fact, is it?
It's a scientific fact, and if you are interested, I'll tell you two really powerful examples. And these are two prison experiments. So in the US, there's a lot of experiments that have done in the past on prisoners. There's two in particular. A classic is in a prison in the US, they restricted the intake of prisoners by 2/3. So they're allowed to eat 1/3 of their daily caloric intake. And lo and behold, all the prisoners started to lose weight. And what happened is the prisoners became obsessed with food. All they would talk about was food. They would look at pictures of food, posters of food all day. Many of them even reported going to bed with cookbooks. They became obsessed with food. And what happened is as soon as the restriction was over a period of weeks, despite the weight loss, immediately within a matter of days and weeks, what you saw was ravenous appetite of the prisoners, and they rapidly rebounded in weight. They rapidly rebounded in weight and were eating anywhere between 7,000 and 10,000 calories a day. So what you could see is they would lose weight and they would rapidly rebound. Now, opposed to that, another classic prison experiment did the opposite. They took what were relatively young and healthy men and they force fed them and they gave them anywhere. So the average male intake is, let's just say, 2,000 to 3,000 calories. They force fed them 7,000 to 10,000 calories. Now, one would expect that you would gain weight. And what was clear is that actually it's very hard to gain weight. Prisoners would gain weight, and even to gain just a 2 kilogram weight gain and sustain it, healthy prisoners had to intake over 10,000 calories a day. Now, what this demonstrates is that obesity, the development of obesity and metabolic diseases, is not just about what you eat. There are major biological pathways that resolve in the body and especially the brain that become broken. And in order to achieve sustained remission from metabolic diseases, one must address these core biological mechanisms.
I must say, I'd be interested to see the ethics process for the prison studies, but still, it's very interesting information. If I could invite Katherine Samaras from St. Vincent's back on the screen, could I just have your initial reaction, Katherine, to what Garron Dodd has just said?
Yeah, look, I think those studies are very interesting, but we haven't talked about genes, because genes will determine our pot size, and whether we achieve our genetic predisposition for weight depends on how many calories we put in our mouth. And this was shown most elegantly in twin studies. Now, in the twin studies, they did two sets. One was restriction and one was overfeeding. And again, in that model, like what Gannon referred to, there were some people who ate, they were all overfed the same amount, but some people gained a little bit of weight, but different. And because they're twins, they tracked exactly the same. So the same set of twins would gain 2 kilos, but there were some twins that would gain 5 or 8 kilos. And then they also did restriction studies, and you can understand that there were not so many volunteers. These were volunteers who gave informed consent rather than the poor prisoners. But in the restriction, the amount, everybody got the same degree of caloric restriction based on their starting weight. So it was a % reduction in their calorie intake. But the amount of weight lost was exactly the same between the twins, but highly different between the sets of twins. And this fits in with what we know, that we have genetic set points that say your pot is this big.
And when you say pot, what does that mean?
Well, the amount of % body fat, or the grams of fat, the kilograms of fat that you might get to. So some people, in response to an energy dense, constant food smorgasbord that we have available to us in Australia, some people might gain 2 kilos or 5 kilos, a lot of it driven by genetics on appetite regulation, and other people will just keep going and will, gain an excess of weight and be obese or morbidly obese. So I think the genetics, we showed 25 years ago that genetic factors explain 50% of the difference in body fatness from one person to the other, and 60% of the difference in our central obesity between one person and another. So the genetics we've known about. And why do we have these different genetics? Well, there is a selection process that we know about that's been occurring for the length of time that human beings have been on Earth. There have been survival events where people who have been famine, war, having to move from moving from Mesopotamia to another country because of drought, usually crop failures. We've had situations like concentration camps, prisoner of war camps. We've had blockades. Think the St. Petersburg blockade. There was no food going in for how many years? And the people that could manage to survive are those people that could hold on to their body fat stores. We have a famine going on in Somalia as we speak. The people that survive that are the people that will access food. They'll have a drive to find food. They'll have mechanisms where they don't lose weight very easily, so they can hold on to their fat stores. They might have superior capacity to exercise, so they will walk over mountain ranges to find food in another country. So there are...
So it's an evolutionary result, is what you're telling us.
Exactly. And so there are redundant pathways. So, and this goes back to something that Gannon said. We have, if one system, we can't access food for some reason, people are losing weight by intentionally restricting their calories, mechanisms will come into place to defend body fat stores so that the weight loss stops.
If I could just say quickly, I want to go to questions shortly, if I may, and then we'll come back again. And I want to reassure our viewers, because I know many join us for practical advice on the way forward, and we will turn to that. But I guess this is the very important context, isn't it? And I guess I just want to have just a very brief comment, if I could, from each of you, that Teresa, who began our partner, community partner, talked about stigma, and there is a tremendous stigma to people being overweight, and what, let alone obese. And I might say I've been diagnosed as obese, and I didn't think I looked obese. So even people's understanding of visually of what obese looks like, it's actually less than many of us think, if you know what I mean. We're an overweight population. But the stigma's just cruel and wrong, isn't it? It's gravely unfair. Does it inhibit your patient's capacity to get well and to reduce weight, Katherine?
Look, people come with a burden, a psychological burden because of stigma, but we also need to use the D word. There is discrimination, and the discrimination comes from doctors, school teachers, the PBS, because that was alluded to very early. And if we want to talk about access to drugs, there is huge discrimination, but there's also discrimination in employment, and that can create poverty. We know people who are overweight or obese are promoted less. They're often, working the same job but are paid less. So there is actual discrimination. The stigma is what people also feel. It's an immense burden.
Would you like to comment on that, Garron?
Yeah, well put, Katherine. I agree. And I think if I may put a scientific lens on it, like, why does the stigma arise? It's complicated, but what is clear is, even in the preamble, a bit by myself and Katherine just explaining that what you can take from that is the mechanisms of obesity are incredibly complicated. There's genetic, there's physiological, there's a lot to this. And I think, see, that juxtaposes to what people believe about obesity. They don't understand it. They think it's simple as calories in, calories out. It's a product of willpower. But what you can at least take away from what myself and Katherine have alluded to at the start is actually it's a problem. It's a biological, medical issue, and I think it's that understanding that really probably drives that stigma and discrimination.
Because it's not about willpower, Garron. That's one of your key messages tonight for those watching, isn't it?
It's not about willpower. That is misguided. It's misunderstood. And Katherine said a little bit at the start that there's more to food intake than just meal times. And you know this. Okay, so here's a good example as to why you know this. Is you know this because if it was as simple as that, then if there was two people and you just didn't give them access to food, they would equally get hungry as time went on. So therefore, there's a linear relationship between hunger, willpower, etc. But because the length of time that you don't eat, actually the longest time is in the morning, because then you've not eaten all day. Many people, when they wake up in the morning, do not feel hunger. If anything, hunger is entrained in other ways. But what this demonstrates is that there are biological systems, there are hormones, there are systems in the brain, etc., that are really regulating that. You are not in control of it. It is not a product of your will.
And I know, Katherine, one of your thoughts is that it's important to get rid of the sanctity of breakfast. Can you just quickly explain that? And then I might go to our questions. Some questions, please.
We didn't have breakfast until after the Industrial Revolution. So this idea that you need to breakfast like a king, that's a narrative that has been promoted by the food industry. And what I want to lead into here is how, and it relates to something that Gannon said, we are prisoners of our environment and we don't control our environment. And the science shows us that a simple visual image of food will trigger a very potent appetite-stimulating hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin actually even also makes your stomach empty because, of course, you're going to fill it with food because you've seen a food image. Now, just think about how we're inundated with food imaging through advertising. Children are inundated with food images on television, outside their school, everywhere. These things promote appetite for food. It's
Amazing.
Really very hard.
Well, look, weight management's our topic tonight, and I'd like to now welcome Dr. Lena Safro to the screen, and she's going to bring us some of your questions. Hi, Lena. If you could turn on your mic, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely. So we've got lots and lots of questions tonight. I'd say roughly divided between the questions about the effectiveness of the drugs for weight loss and possible benefits for other systems, and a concern about safety, and specifically concerns about the use in children, about long-term use, and about the possibility of eating disorders developing over time. So lots of people would like some comments on those.
Okay, so may I come to you, Katherine, first of all, in terms of the role of these medications, and are they, as I understand it, when you're dealing with some patients, it's medication or bariatric surgery are two considerations. And I guess if we come to the medications first, in what circumstances would you recommend their use, and what else is associated with their use? And then we might come to the risks and side effects.
So when I do that assessment that I've talked about, and it takes a long time to get that information, if somebody's just filling out a questionnaire on a website, that's not an assessment. And if they're in their diet, I see that there is some simple low-hanging fruit that can help. Then I go with diet and exercise. And diet and exercise is the foundation stone. It has to be there. But if there are factors where people have tried really hard, they can't sustain, they have food noise, they have intrusive cravings, because often food cravings can be produced by consuming certain foods, high carbohydrate, high fructose foods, fruit sugars. Fruit sugars are not benign. They will stimulate great appetite. If there's a high sucrose, fructose intake, people will often recognize that they eat rice and then they're starving. One can change the diet and switch to a lower carbohydrate, higher protein. This is in the distribution of what's on the plate. It's not eating a lot more of the protein, but restricting carbohydrates often frees people from a lot of those carbohydrate cravings. Before I use the glucagon-like peptide 1 receptors, the GLP-1s, I will often offer people metformin, which is often great at helping with food cravings, if that's a big factor. If people have tried a lot of different things and, their diet looks good and I can't see those low-hanging fruit, I will offer people a GLP-1. And we always start low dose. I keep written notes so I know what I prescribe people, and people come back and they're on a lot more than I prescribed. And why is that? The chemist tells them to take more. I mean, that's not correct, because sometimes a really low dose is all people need. And we keep working on managing how we negotiate this food-rich, visually food-rich environment. We know that things like artificial or non-caloric sweeteners, because they can be natural, stevia, for example, or not natural, but the sweeteners can actually stimulate insulin receptors and can stimulate hunger and the response, the physiological response to eating the non-caloric food. So there are lots of things to do with or without the GLP-1s. Now, starting low is important, and finding the lowest dose that helps that person negotiate the food noise, the cravings, and help retrain the brain to consume less. It's got to be less. It doesn't have to be nothing. It just has to be less than what they were usually doing, day after day after day, negotiating the feasts, the parties, the stressors, the depressed periods, the anxiety and panic attacks, whatever else may be there, the relationship breakdowns, the bringing up the teenage daughter. All of those things, they require support, because people will comfort eat. And if you don't help find people new ways of responding to the stimuli that often promote a binge, what gets called a binge, or eating things that that will derail the program, I think that's really important.
What I'm hearing from you is that these GLP-1 medications, these new medications that are getting an enormous amount of community discussion, they're huge on social media, that they do in many cases have a an important contribution to weight management, which is important for a whole lot of health reasons. We'll hear more about that later. But that the issue of nutrition and the psychological element in excessive eating is still critical. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. You have to still climb the mountain of caloric restriction.
Why do you call it a mountain?
It's so hard. It's so hard to do. It's like climbing, I don't know, K9 or Everest. And people slide. And it is hard work. But I've had people say on the GLP-1s, is this what normal people feel like? I'm not having any food noise.
What is this food noise you keep talking about? Describe what that means.
Well, food noise is where, you're just quietly going along with what you're doing, but you're having intrusive thoughts about food. It's like, should I be eating? Oh, I've seen that. I think I want that. I'm going to have to resist that. It derails people's productivity. One fellow the other day said, my productivity at work has gone up because I'm not going off looking for food and making a cup of tea instead. I'm just focusing on my work. I thought I had ADHD. It was just intrusive food thoughts. So some people live with that constantly, and it's so hard to break free of that. But these drugs actually help with that. And so they help people, they enable people to do the hard yards of eating less every single day. And it doesn't have to be a lot less. It's portion size reduction. It's getting rid of the grazing. It's getting rid of the stress-related eating or the comfort eating or the relaxation-associated eating. For some people, they can get a handle on their alcohol consumption and they can actually reduce that. And that's really important to recognize.
But there's some evidence there, isn't it, that it is helping in that area.
Through the brain.
I want to come to the side effect issues because it's so critical that we make that clear and why they work better for some than others. But could I just get a comment from Garron? Your thoughts on this, Garron, in terms of your anticipation of what proportion of people struggling with weight may ultimately take these medications?
Okay, so what proportion of people struggling with weight may take them? Well, actually, what we know is despite their prevalence in the media, if you look at the global incidence of obesity, only a fraction of people have been exposed to these GLP-1 therapeutics.
And is that because of cost?
Well, that is certainly one barrier. Now, just on cost as well, if I go back in my career, maybe 15 years ago when we started to develop these therapies, we developed with a drug company called Novo Nordisk, which is Danish. They have done studies where they've given out these therapies for free to the Danish community. So they've lowered that barrier, but still people discontinue them for clear reasons. So I think it's very clear that cost is a certain barrier. Just to briefly sprinkle a little bit of information on that as well. The patents that underpin and the protection of these therapies are due to run out next year and beyond, and that will lower the threshold for these therapies. There's also different modalities, so like a pill form, and that makes it much cheaper as well. So the cost is going to certainly come down. But to your question on side effects, I've already mentioned exactly where those side effects reside. It's through their targeting of the GLP-1 receptor in an area of the brain that regulates nausea and like say gastrointestinal motility and how that moves.
So it can be either constipation or diarrhea. Is that
exactly
what you're talking? Yeah.
Exactly. So they're key things, and obviously there are side effects on the pancreas. So pancreatitis, that's a clear area.
And it's as I understand it, two key things to get communicating. Please tell me, and Katherine will as well, if there's more. But if we've ever had pancreatitis or that has been mentioned, it's critical not to use these medications, and they're also of concern around eyesight, diabetic related eyesight.
Exactly. So in a nutshell, that's because pancreatitis, thus inflammation of the pancreas and the systems that support it, one would certainly be vulnerable to repeated incidences of this because the GLP-1 receptor is a very powerful receptor on the pancreas that promotes the secretion of insulin. The eye is a very glucose hungry, so blood sugar hungry organ. So reductions in how those tissues uptake glucose from the blood, which is exactly what a GLP-1 drug would do by targeting those receptors on the eye, would have effects. So they're two key patient populations that are strongly advised not to take them. So they are clear side effects, but for the general population, the side effects largely revolve around nausea and GI disturbances. And actually, remarkably, I would say, in a very positive way, despite that, they're not the worst things in the world. They're certainly manageable. And what is clear is that the neurocircuitry of appetite and metabolism in general is incredibly complex, and it's proved to be incredibly difficult to target. So a therapy, so that's why these GLP-1 based therapies are so revolutionary, because they are effective and they actually have a relatively minimal side effect profile compared to other things that science has developed and tried to target this big problem.
Katherine, could you comment on side effects, particularly this issue of this things like nausea or diarrhea or constipation? Do they moderate in many patients? So give us a sense of what you're experiencing on the clinical front line.
So the nausea and the gut side effects of constipation are much, much less with another GLP-1 called tirzepatide than they are with the semaglutide, which is marketed as Ozempic and Wegovy.
And what's the one that's less likely to have a gut impact called commercially, if you wouldn't mind, just so people know?
Tirzepatide is the generic name. Mounjaro is the trade name. What's really important, and it fits into the clinician advice, is you have to give people advice about how you manage the side effects, because a lot of the people that I see who have used the GLP-1s and had no success with it haven't withstood it because they've given up because of side effects. But nobody was telling them that you have to go up gradually if you go up at all. Nobody was telling them about being proactive to maintain a regular bowel habit. And you have to do this. The pancreatitis, thankfully, is extremely rare. It's when people often haven't told you that they also slightly like to use alcohol. But we do know that rapid weight loss, no matter how you do it, is going to form gallstones. And one of the key things that I get very upset about people prescribing the GLP-1s and not giving appropriate advice is not telling people to add, and this is all it takes, a tablespoon of olive oil to their food every day, because that will prevent the gallstones, whether you're doing very low energy diets with meal replacement shakes, or whether you have bariatric surgery, or whether you use a GLP-1 agent. You have to do the right thing, prevent gallstones, and maintain a regular, healthy bowel habit.
But do we have any information on long-term use? And I think the other issue raised by Lena from the audience is there any concern around eating disorders, the overuse of these medications or inappropriate use?
Would you like me to talk about side effects?
Yeah. Would you go first?
So we have had the first GLP-1 was actually a medication called exenatide, which came out maybe 24, 25 years ago. So we've got 20 years safety data with that particular agent. It's no longer in use because why would you take an injection twice a day, which is what that was, when you can take one once a week? So the market fell out and a very useful cheap drug was removed. With the semaglutide, the Ozempic Wegovy, we have 6-7 years of safety data. We know by 5 years there is reduction in heart failure, heart attack, stroke, death from heart disease. We know that diabetes rates are significantly reduced, and we have a sense that there is less cancer. And you expect to see that because we saw that in the bariatric studies where people lost a lot of weight. So it's a specific effect of losing weight. We know that heart failure improves not a couple, 10 or so years ago, we showed that people who have severe heart failure and undertake bariatric surgery, 50% of the people who were listed for heart transplant, so I'm at St. Vincent's, we're a heart transplant hospital, 50% of the people who had severe heart failure and lost the weight no longer needed a heart transplant. So it's a weight loss effect, independent of how you actually get there.
You've also been involved with a study, the memory study, and there's an indication of reduction in risk of dementia. Is that correct?
Correct. So we showed about 5 years ago that people with diabetes taking metformin had 80% lower rates of dementia at the 6-year mark. And now we're doing the memory study to actually look at that in people who do not have diabetes but take metformin for 3 years. So it's a randomized controlled trial that we're doing here. It's important to talk about the potential of GLP-1s and reduce dementia risk.
Do we know yet?
Well, they stopped the study. So this was a couple of months ago. The study, I think, I'm saying this publicly, had its limitations. They took people who were so far down the Alzheimer's pathway that there was probably no way back. We couldn't expect a medication to take somebody back from the verge of Alzheimer's disease. My view is you've got to start a lot earlier. And so I'm concerned because probably no company now is going to invest in a large randomized controlled trial to test this very important area, because we know there are so many GLP-1 receptors in the hippocampus, which is that part of the brain to do with memory. So it's a crying shame, I think, that study was stopped.
Can I just ask you, is there any increased likelihood of overweight and obesity in lower socioeconomic groups? Do we have evidence on that?
We know that overweight and obesity inflicts people from the lower sociodemographic groups far, far more. One of the issues is that carbohydrate, energy-dense processed foods are much lower cost. We know people who live in postcodes that are lower sociodemographic have less access. There are fewer parks, there's less public transport, so people don't move or play. We know women who live in postcodes that are considered unsafe, or even if they feel that they are unsafe, they won't go outside to walk, they don't exercise. We know that those people have much higher rates of obesity and its complications.
And then there's that food desert idea. I've spent a lot of my life both in the inner city of major cities and also in rural areas. And when you go to rural areas, you just see a lot more overweight people. But the food that's available, there's a couple of RSLs, I won't name them, it's probably not right to do, or I think they're almost designed in all their food, the only food options, to make people morbidly obese. So that notion of food deserts is often linked to socioeconomic factors as well, isn't it?
Absolutely correct. I invite people to go on Google Maps, put in their favorite or not favorite fast food chain, have a look at where all the red dots come up. They're on the commuter pathways. So people might drive home from work, it's an hour and a half, and at the freeway turnoff, there are 55, there's a concentration of fast food outlets. You drive in, you drive out. There are not organic food providores, there are not salad bars. It's cheap food and it's fast, and that's where they're going for. The large corporations are targeting those people.
I want to remember to ask you later, and Lena can help me remember too, that we need to find out if there are other weight loss strategies that are evidence-based that can be useful in partnership with these medications. But could I just stay with the cost factor? Garron, if I could bring you back in, you did mention costs may be going down, but if for people who are watching this now or may listen to it in the hospital or online, these right now, something like Mounjaro, you can pay something like $500 a month. So this is a discrimination issue, is it, for some?
It is. Okay, but let's first think, okay, why are they so expensive? And you're right, off the top of my head, the range of, say, Mounjaro is anywhere from $350 a month, all the way to maybe 700 on the higher doses. So why are they so expensive? Is it purely just the greed of big pharma? Well, there's a very important element to this, and that is the type of drug that Ozempic and Mounjaro are. They are a peptide-based drug. So these are, actually, it's mimicking a natural hormone in the body. And these are, one, expensive to produce, two, expensive to ship and distribute around the world. And fundamentally, one that takes these drugs know that you get them refrigerated. So there's an element of complication to these drugs that speaks to that price. It's not the only reason they're expensive, but that's a key thing. So what are the two things that are changing in the landscape? One, the patents around Ozempic and later Mounjaro are running out. So what this will do is this will allow generic forms of semaglutide, which is the drug Ozempic, to become available. And this will dramatically lower the price. The second big important thing to mention is that oral, like pill forms of these drugs are being developed, and there's already an Ozempic pill out there. This is important because, as we know, the pills that we take, they don't have these distribution issues and the same costs associated with their manufacturing. So these are two key big changes on the landscape. That said, what I do, if there's one thing I'd like people to take away from today, from myself, is that these are not a silver bullet. So these are first generation, the first step in the changing of the obesity landscape. There are new and different approaches on the horizon. They will be completely independent of these GLP-1 receptors. So these will be drugs that will work in a different way, that largely may not have the same side effects associated with them, that may be efficacious in more people, because not every doesn't, Ozempic, Mounjaro doesn't work in everyone.
That's important to know, isn't it?
It's
Yes.
very important to know. And this is for biological reasons. We spoke about the importance of genetics, the importance of the biological reasons why one is obese. And fundamentally, these drugs that are out there, Ozempic, Mounjaro, do not target the biological reasons and why one is obese. So what I'm trying to demonstrate is that in the current first generation GLP-1 based therapies, the barriers around cost will be changing, but it's an emerging class of drugs. It's a glorious dawn, as I mentioned, and there are going to be different things coming out in the next 5 to 10 years, and certainly access is a key consideration around the production and the funding associated with the new class of obesity medications.
And Katherine, the other issue where access to do with socioeconomic status, how much money you've got, is also, you've emphasised at the outset the need for medical supervision, that's important, and that it's not just about the injection or the pill, it's going to be about the total context of your healthcare. That not everyone goes regularly to the general practitioner if bulk billing isn't available. I live in an outer suburb of Adelaide, and there are certainly people who I mix with socially who for whom the cost of general practice can be a barrier. So there's a potential here, I guess, one, for our health systems to have a very, like the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, huge challenges around access because of the budgetary impact. But also at the individual level, there are issues around access due to money. Does that come up in your clinical work?
All the time. I run a private practice, and I also provide an obesity service through the public hospital. There is such demand for obesity services. Last week, I was on an international symposium that was based in London that was looking at the crisis of obesity. And, we're asking the consumer, the individual, the afflicted person, to be making all the changes and be negotiating an environment which is obesogenic. We need to change that. You know, as a doctor, I'm treating the end product of a sick environment that is promoting obesity at every step. We need to change the environment so that we can prevent people with these magnificent genes to store energy and keep holding it. We have to change the environment so that we prevent them going to that pathway where they're going to battle weight for the rest of their life. So yes, we have access issues, but we have to acknowledge that there are faults all along the way that produce obese people. We have seen an explosion in the incidence of obesity over the last 40, 50 years, more than doubling of the rates of obese adults, certainly, I don't know, 5 times the rates of childhood obesity.
And that just reminds me, are these medications appropriate for children? At what age? Are there protocols in relation to that?
Yes, there are. And look, I mean, they can be safely used in children. Children who become obese stay obese for life, and they just get bigger and bigger. They will suffer more stigma, fewer educational opportunities, and, you know, for their lifetime be, you know, put into that category of are going to struggle financially, are going to struggle with stigma and discrimination and low self-esteem and mood disorders as a consequence. So we have to do something to support those families, because it's not the child's problem, it's the family's problem, and it's going to be family intervention to try and create an environment where this child can try and lose some weight and approximate a much healthier weight. So yes, you can use medications. Do we know much about them? Yes, there's good evidence at using the GLP-1s in children and adolescents. With bariatric surgery has been available for adolescents, and with data going back, you know, maybe 15 years. So it's not just the GLP-1s. I think it's important to consider bariatric surgery. But here especially, we need absolutely careful medical supervision of all aspects of nutrition to make sure that growth and adolescence occur normally, that reproductive health is going to be normal. We have to have the psychological support so people, young people, children through adolescence, which is such a ghastly time. I don't know if people remember their adolescence. It can be such a ghastly time where, you know, if you're not one of the crowd and people are bullying you and teasing you because of weight, people carry that all their life. It's an awful thing.
What we've got about 10, 12 minutes left. So I want to come to Lena. Are there issues that have come in from our audience that we haven't touched? If we could do some quick rapid fire and answer ones, please.
Sure. There are quite a few questions about changing eating behaviors and managing common cravings such as sweet tooth. And specifically, the things that people are asking about are intermittent fasting, hypnosis, and the use of supplements such as OptiFast.
Thank you. Can you answer those, Katherine?
Sure. So let's do OptiFast first. OptiFast is a proprietary brand. It's a very low energy diet meal replacement. Each shake has about 140 calories. And what's important, it has the right balance of nutrients and minerals that if you don't have anything else, you can actually have a 450 calorie per day diet. It's very low energy and you won't be nutritionally deprived. There are lots of other things that are not complete, lots of other protein supplements. They won't be complete. There's a couple of others that are, you know, have a similar composition to that. So there is actually some competition for that, you know, top edge item. That's been around for like 40 years and it was developed at Cambridge University, and it's a safe, whole diet. And it can sometimes be a good circuit breaker for people. If we look at intermittent fasting, I think that it's, again, you've got to find the right diet. For people who don't wake up hungry, they can then go on and have break their fast, if you like, with a brunch. And so have 2 meals, one at maybe 11:30 to 12:30, another one at maybe 6, 7 p.m., and then have that long fast. And the long fast then helps. We can call that time-restricted eating. So 8-16. A 16-hour fast, 2 meals, not grazing all day for that 8 hours. That can really work well for those people who are not hungry when they wake up in the morning. And it is what we used to do before the Industrial Revolution. Supplements, other supplements. There's quite a few supplements that make claims about assisting with metabolism. Berberine works just like metformin, but it costs 10 times as much for a month's supply. So, be aware of that. Don't be taken for a ride. Does turmeric and cinnamon help? The effects are so modest. If you have lots of money and want to take lots of pills, I don't really subscribe to that. I think you can quite easily add cinnamon, turmeric to your diet and get the benefit that way. There was a third thing, Lena.
Yes, someone was asking about hypnosis.
Very, very important. So I've seen hypnosis work really well for people who have got some very discrete kinds of food addictions. I've had a couple of patients where it's helped them with their chocolate addiction in a really positive way. You have to be open to it. And what's really important is finding the right hypnotherapists. There is the Medical College of Hypnotherapists that is in Sydney, and they have a good list of people in Sydney that, can be quite helpful. So, there are those things to try. And I've found with people where hypnosis has worked, sometimes they need to have, if they lapse in some way, a second go at hypnosis works just as well.
Any other specific ones, Lena, from you?
Apart from those, there are interesting questions about our food pyramid, if anyone has any comments to make, because as we know, the Australian food pyramid has a lot of carbohydrates at the base, which probably doesn't accord with the evidence.
Correct. So that food pyramid you might find, if you're using that, please burn the thing. The National Health and Medical Research Council got rid of that a long time ago, and there's a plate that they use. I invite people to look at the Harvard School of Public Health pyramid, which actually has all the carbohydrates at the apex. And because it's recognized that when you eat carbohydrate, it stimulates appetite for more carbohydrate, and that's through the insulin response. And there will be those people where, you start eating and you're eating a carbohydrate and then you just cannot stop.
And just remind us a few foods that are carbohydrates. Let's not assume that.
So you've got simple and you've got complex. And some of the simple sugars, so that's in cane sugar, it's in cakes and sweets and a lot of soft drinks, most soft drinks, but it's also in fruit. There's a small amount in dairy. The complex carbohydrates are things like bread, pasta, rice, potato, sweet potato, corn, peas. So it's a lot of very healthy carbohydrates that we see, complex carbohydrates, are perhaps not the right thing in large quantities for people who have excess weight or food cravings, because it may actually, people with prediabetes, people with polycystic ovary syndrome, they'll have cravings for more food after those foods, and it's because of the insulin resistance and the insulin spike.
So core health literacy still matters, and there's a place for nutritionists, dietitians, and also exercise physiologists, because just very quickly on one side effect of these injectable medications, isn't muscle loss an issue in some cases?
Muscle loss is an issue with every single form of weight reduction. And if you take the GLP-1s and you just stop eating all food, you're going to lose a lot more muscle. One has to ensure that there is adequate protein in the diet. Protein is the most important thing that goes onto your plate. Protein also has a much higher satiety effect, so talking about switching off hunger, where carbohydrates won't help. Fats won't necessarily help, but protein will assist in people stopping to seek food. You don't have to eat a bucket load of it. You don't even have to have 200 grams. You just have to have enough protein. If the exercise is not there and the protein is not there, no matter which way you lose weight loss, you will lose a lot of muscle mass.
Okay, and that's falls risk for a lot of our viewers and listeners. I know Professor Garron Dodd needs to go in about 5 minutes, but is there something you'd like to comment on the issues that Lena Safro has been bringing from the audience, or anything else before you go?
I think one area that's not been touched on is what happens when you stop taking the medication. Is this a short-term fix? Is it a long-term solution? Well, I think there are a few things. I think what is clear is that just like any weight loss intervention, as soon as you stop doing it, there's a rapid rebound. And what is clear now, it's been shown in many clinical trials and preclinical trials, that upon cessation of a GLP-1 based injectable drug, you'll get a rapid rebound in body weight. You will put on fat, and you will likely lose many of those beneficial effects that were ensured by the GLP-1. So that is clear. So is this a solution long term? Now, look, there are many drugs that we take over the long term, and it's likely that weight management pharmacotherapies will be one of them. But what is also clear, and another important limitation, is that whilst people may lose lots of weight, people may lose some weight, some people may not respond to these therapies, everyone eventually plateaus for one of many reasons. And this is a clear thing as well. So then it speaks to around maintenance of these therapies. And we spoke a little bit about the patient journey. Again, something that I'm sure Katherine can speak to at great length. But if we think about it, where to beyond the GLP-1, when one stops taking it, if one plateaus, we've reached the higher dose, where to from there beyond simply bariatric surgery? And that is where the next generation of obesity therapeutics needs to come in. So that's one thing I'd just like to add around what happens, how long do we take, what happens when we stop taking them, and what's the next things to get excited about over the next 5 years or so.
Yes, thank you. Any comment there, Katherine? And then I'll see if Alina has another question for us.
Look, we had I saw some very interesting things when there were restrictions on access to the GLP-1s. Availability was down a couple of years ago. People may remember that. There was the discriminatory effect of trying to reserve these medications only for people with diabetes. I thought that was highly discriminatory. People didn't have access, and there were some people who, just as Garron described, very rapid weight regain. There were those people who just kept their weight going exactly where it was, whether they were taking the medication or not. They had maintained their weight loss without the medication. And I was fascinated to explore what people did to maintain their weight. And one person put it extremely eloquently, and I'm going to share that with you. I was too scared to eat anything different from what I was doing on the medication. So through great willpower, they maintained that caloric restriction, and so they didn't go up.
Just, Garron, before you go, was it willpower, or in some cases were there new neural pathways, like had something changed in their brain, or is it just that they were self-disciplined?
Well, don't use self-disciplined. It says.
Oh, sorry. You used what language is the right language?
They were able to maintain the calorie restriction.
Okay, thank you. My apologies. Is there any evidence that it would just be about maintaining the behaviour rather than would it have been easier after having had a significant period? No, the answer is just no, Katherine, is it?
Very hard. It stays very hard. And this is why I call it the Everest. You know, it's this pitfalls along the way, and it's a hard, slow journey all the way up. And you've got to kind of like a mountain climber, dig in and not give up. It's hard.
I try so hard to avoid personal revelation in this role as an MC on these things, but I will do a tiny bit of self-revelation. I actually find it reassuring. Others may react differently when an expert clinician says it's really hard, because I think, well, that's factual, and I need to factor that in to the way I think about it, because years ago I needed to give up alcohol, and someone said, look, the first 5 or 6 years, Julie, it's a bit difficult in social situations not to drink alcohol in Australia. And I remember thinking 5 to 6 years. And then I thought, no, this person is telling me something that it's a serious and hard thing to do, but utterly worthwhile. And I think that's what you both agree with, isn't it? That the benefits of weight loss with potentially dementia, but certainly with heart cancer reduction risk, it's worth the Everest. Is that what you're thinking, Garron?
The benefits are massive, and that is clear. And very interesting, the intersection of how the brain becomes, let's say, addicted to alcohol, and let's say addicted loosely to food, because it's a different relationship. They're very, very similar. And that is why GLP-1 therapies both regulate food noise and alcohol noise. That's why it's very, very hard to give up drinking, because it's a complex behavior.
Right. Our time is literally up, but is there anything, Lena, that if we don't ask it, will have been, inappropriately wrong? Is there any other question I should give them?
Yeah, just as a doctor myself working in general practice, I'd like to ask Katherine, at what point do you recommend GLP-1 drugs? Is there a specific body mass index, specific physiologic or pathological parameters where you make that decision? What are the eligibility criteria?
Well, I wouldn't use eligibility criteria, because I think you're looking at a guideline, and that guidelines, unfortunately, don't consider the individual.
Mm.
So I make that cut off very individually. Like, okay, it's time you need a GLP-1. Each of those journeys are so different for different people. And for some people, it will be at the first visit, like, well, you've tried everything. You need this. I can see you have all these health issues. There'll be other people who may be, 120 kilos, but I can see 25 things that they can do to change. And they need to have a go at that before they get a prescription. And I need to understand the factors, and then it's my role to help them negotiate what have been the traps for them along the way and help them out of those traps. If somebody's eating 6 Mars bars every evening, and I have patients that do, I have to find out what's triggering that addiction, what's triggering that behavior, and how can I call it, you need a toolbox of 10 different things in how you respond to that trigger, so that the Mars bars are number 11 in that list of things. And I want you to try everything else before we have the Mars bars. It's a quick fix to give them a GLP-1, but have I done them any favor? Have I taught them how to negotiate the fact that every time they go to the supermarket, every time they go and get petrol, they will see the chocolate bar there at half price, at quarter price, 2 for 1. And they're triggered, they're hungry, and they just buy them. I mean, we all do that. Nothing as appealing as 2 for 1. And I'm standing there at the petrol station at 8 p.m. starving, and there they are right in front of me. To pay, I have to go over them. The marketing is so strong, it's so pervasive, it's so negative.
And so cruel. Our time is up, but I just thank you so much for that very important question, Lena. I'd really like to thank Professor Katherine Samaras from St Vincent's Hospital, and also Professor Garron Dodd from the University of Melbourne. It's just been an enormously informative and helpful webinar. So thank you so much. And thank you to you, Lena, for your questions and the monitoring of the questions. And I'll just say thank you, of course, to you for watching.